The moment you choose yourself, everything changes. Not because you become different, but because you finally become true. When you choose yourself, you stop begging for effort. You stop negotiating for the bare minimum. You stop shrinking to be tolerable. You stop bleeding yourself dry for people who only sip from you. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It is self-respect, self-resonance, self-return. It is the moment your soul says, I'm done abandoning myself to be chosen by people who don't even know how to choose themselves. And that moment, that quiet, sacred moment, is exactly when you become unforgettable, because people always remember the person they didn't value until it was too late. You become unforgettable because you stop being available, not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Clarity about who you are, clarity about what you deserve, clarity about what your heart will no longer tolerate. The truth is this: most people only realize your worth when your energy is no longer theirs to drain. Most people only recognize your presence when they feel the echo of your absence. Most people only understand your value when you no longer offer it freely. You become unforgettable the moment you stop overgiving, the moment you stop explaining, the moment you stop performing just to earn the bare minimum of affection. People remember that loss because they didn't just lose you, they lost access to the version of you that used to show up for them more than they ever showed up for you. Choosing yourself is the shift they never expected, the shift where you stop proving, stop pleading, stop hoping, stop waiting, and finally start protecting your peace. You become unforgettable because you no longer settle. And nothing haunts a person more than realizing you were the one thing they should have held on to while they still could. When you choose yourself, your energy changes, your boundaries sharpen, your confidence strengthens, your silence becomes powerful, your presence becomes expensive. You stop being an option. You become a standard. And standards? They are unforgettable. People don't miss the person who tolerated their uncertainty. They miss the person who finally walked away from it. They miss the version of you they assumed would always stay. The patient you, the forgiving you, the endlessly understanding you, the version that loved loudly, even when it was treated quietly. But when you choose yourself, that version of you evolves. She doesn't disappear. She becomes wiser, stronger, more rooted, more selective. She becomes a version that no longer begs to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. You become unforgettable because you no longer chase anyone. You no longer convince anyone. You no longer carry connections that refuse to carry you back. That emotional shift, that self-sourced power, is unforgettable because it's the moment you stop hoping for reciprocity and start giving it to yourself. People always come back to the person who chose herself, not because she's waiting, but because she stopped waiting. And nothing is more magnetic than a woman who has reclaimed her worth. The moment you choose yourself, you stop being accessible. You stop being predictable. You stop being the emotional home for someone who only ever gave you temporary shelter. And that loss hits people in places they don't know how to admit. The moment you choose yourself, you become unforgettable because you finally remember who you were before you let the wrong people make you doubt it. Choosing yourself isn't a moment of pride. It's a moment of truth, a moment where you finally admit that you've been giving too much, caring too deeply, hoping too loudly for someone who never learned how to meet you where you are. It's not that they didn't care. It's that they didn't care enough. Not enough to grow. Not enough to reflect. Not enough to change. Not enough to match the softness you kept pouring into them. And you finally realized that loving someone who refuses to evolve is a slow kind of self-abandonment. When you choose yourself, you break that cycle. You stop mothering his emotions. You stop holding his potential. You stop waiting for the day he finally becomes the man you kept seeing in your imagination. You stop worshiping almost. This is why the moment you choose yourself is unforgettable, because most people live their entire lives avoiding self-respect, avoiding self-accountability, avoiding self-confrontation. But you didn't. You chose the harder path, the honest path, the path where you lose people, but find yourself. And that kind of shift is impossible to forget. People don't forget the person who finally stopped explaining herself. They don't forget the moment you stopped justifying your needs, stopped shrinking your truth, stopped dimming your intuition, so someone else could stay comfortable. Your power became quiet, but your absence became loud. When you choose yourself, you outgrow emotional chaos. You outgrow mixed signals. You outgrow breadcrumb love. You outgrow waiting for effort that should have been there from the beginning. You rise out of their emotional immaturity in a way they didn't expect, a way that leaves a mark. Choosing yourself isn't closing the door on someone. It's opening the door back to yourself. It's returning to your own voice, your own standards, your own intuition, your own emotional home. And once you return to yourself, you stop tolerating connections that make you feel homeless. You become unforgettable because you no longer absorb their wounds. You no longer translate their confusion. You no longer excuse their distance. By calling it patience, you finally see the truth as it is, not as you hoped it would be. That clarity is unforgettable. You stop choosing potential. You stop choosing fantasy. You stop choosing the version of him you built in your mind to survive the version of him he showed in reality. When you stop choosing illusions, people feel that loss because illusions are easy, but reality is rare. And you became real with yourself. Choosing yourself isn't about letting him go. It's about letting go of the story that kept you holding on. The story where he changes. The story where he tries. The story where he becomes consistent. The story where your effort is finally matched. The story where your love is finally safe. You realize you were in love with a possibility, not a partnership. And that realization freezes people in their tracks because they know they didn't lose you. They lost the version of you that believed in them. You become unforgettable because you refuse to stay in places where your soul can't breathe. You become unforgettable because you start choosing alignment over attachment. You become unforgettable because you stop negotiating with people who never learned how to negotiate with themselves. And here's the part they never admit. People always remember the woman who finally recognized her worth. They remember the moment you stopped overextending, stopped overloving, stopped bending yourself into emotional shapes that weren't made for you. They remember it because your absence is the first time they ever had to face themselves. The moment you choose yourself, you stop giving chances that were never earned. You stop offering your heart to people who treat it like a temporary shelter. You stop letting anyone rent pieces of you with inconsistent effort and overdue apologies. Your soul finally raises the rent, and not everyone can pay it. You become unforgettable because you start requiring something most people aren't prepared to offer. Consistency, not promises, not potential, not poetic excuses. Consistency, the steady kind, the grown kind, the kind that doesn't collapse when things get inconvenient. People remember the moment You stop accepting crumbs because crumbs kept them comfortable. Crumbs kept them lazy. Crumbs kept them believing you'd always be there, no matter how little they gave. But the day you choose yourself, you sweep the crumbs off the table and walk away with your dignity. And they never forget that sound. When you choose yourself, your silence becomes louder than all the conversations you used to force. You stop repeating yourself. You stop explaining common sense. You stop convincing someone why you're worthy of the bare minimum. Silence replaces exhaustion. Clarity replaces overthinking. Self-worth replaces self-sacrifice. That shift shakes people, especially the ones who thought you'd never leave. You become unforgettable because you start honoring your intuition. You start trusting the feeling you used to override. You start believing the red flags you used to paint white. You start seeing inconsistencies as information, not invitations to try harder. And when you trust yourself that deeply, you become someone they can never access in the same way again. That kind of evolution haunts people. Choosing yourself isn't an act of rebellion. It's an act of alignment. Alignment with your values. Alignment with your truth. Alignment with the version of you were always meant to become. The version you silenced to keep other people comfortable. That version of you is unforgettable, not because she's louder, but because she's clearer. People don't forget the woman who finally walks away without slamming the door. Calm departure is unforgettable. Silent boundaries are unforgettable. Unforced endings are unforgettable because it means you didn't leave out of anger. You left out of evolution. When you choose yourself, you stop chasing closeness with people who fear intimacy. You stop chasing reassurance from people who trigger your wounds. You stop chasing connection where your spirit is starving. You stop chasing, period. And when a woman stops chasing, she becomes unforgettable because the same people who ignored your effort start craving your energy. People don't miss what they had. They miss what they mishandled. There is something magnetic about a woman who no longer negotiates with her own worth. Her standards sharpen. Her voice strengthens. Her energy becomes intentional. Her presence becomes sacred. She stops being entertained by what once drew her in. She stops being impressed by bare minimum behavior. She stops being accessible to emotional beginners. That kind of auric shift is unforgettable. And somewhere, without saying a single word, your absence becomes a mirror they weren't ready to look into. They see their own inconsistency, their own avoidance, their own emotional immaturity, their own inability to meet you where you always met them. Your self-respect becomes their self-revelation. Your growth becomes their wake-up call. Your choice to choose yourself becomes their regret. The moment you choose yourself, your entire life begins to shift, not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop abandoning yourself to keep familiar chaos alive. You stop participating in relationships that drain you. You stop being the emotional caretaker for people who refuse to grow. Your life reorganizes around your worth, and that transformation is unforgettable. People feel it. When your energy stops apologizing, they feel it. When your boundaries gain integrity, they feel it. When your standards rise higher than their excuses can reach, they feel it. When the access they once had is no longer available, but what they feel most is the difference in you, the self-protected, self-rooted, self-respecting version they never expected to meet. You become unforgettable because you no longer operate from desperation or longing. You operate from truth. You operate from alignment. You operate from emotional maturity. You operate from the knowing that you deserve clarity, consistency, presence, and reciprocity. Not sometimes, not eventually, not when he's ready. Now. And when a woman expects now, she becomes unforgettable because she becomes untouchable to anything less. Choosing yourself isn't a declaration, it's a lifestyle. It's waking up and asking, what nourishes me? What honors me? What protects me? What aligns with me? What feels like truth? Instead of survival, it's living from your center. Instead of living for someone else's approval. And when you live this way, you don't just become unforgettable, you become undeniable. People don't forget the woman who finally stopped shrinking. They don't forget the moment you stood tall in your truth. They don't forget the shift from overgiving to self-honoring. They don't forget the energy that used to pour into them, now pouring back into you. They don't forget because they can't replace it. You can replace a person, but you can't replace a woman who chose herself. Your glow changes. Your posture changes. Your voice changes. Your movement changes. Not in a dramatic way, in a grounded way. You stop grasping. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop performing. You simply are. Authentic, aligned, self-contained. And authenticity is unforgettable. When you choose yourself, you stop attracting people who feed on your softness. You start attracting people who respect it. You stop attracting people who fear depth. You start attracting people who can meet you there. You stop attracting people who confuse you. You start attracting people who bring clarity with them. That shift in energy, that shift in attraction, is the moment your entire story changes. And the world remembers women who rewrite their story. This is the truth. You're not unforgettable because someone lost you. You're unforgettable because you found yourself. You're unforgettable because you healed the versions of you who tolerated too little. You're unforgettable because you reclaimed the power you used to hand away. You're unforgettable because you no longer need validation to feel whole. And wholeness, that is the rarest form of beauty. When you choose yourself, you choose peace. You choose clarity. You choose emotional maturity. You choose alignment. Over attachment, you choose truth. Over potential, you choose self-respect. Over history, and the world remembers people who make choices like that. You become unforgettable because you finally realized you were never asking for too much. You were simply asking people who weren't capable. And once you understand that, you stop lowering your standards to fit inside someone else's limitations. You expand, you elevate, you rise, and the people who once knew you feel that distance like gravity. The moment you choose yourself, you stop being a chapter in someone else's story. You become the author of your own. You become the turning point, the plot twist, the awakening. You become the woman you were always meant to be, the one they think about, wonder about, remember, regret, and can never replace. Because you are unforgettable, not because of them, but because of you.